Did the SS perfect an anti-gravity machine at the end of World War II? Could Nazis teleport between dimensions? Did Hitler escape to the moon aboard this fantastic craft? Don't be alarmed, I'm not self-medicating, but rather repeating some of the claims that have been made in the popular media and on the internet concerning a device known in German as die Glocke, or in English, the bell, the existence of which is a hotly contested topic. As an historian, I've decided to seek out the truth behind the headlines and discover whether die Glocke was a real machine, or whether the story is, as some suggest, bovine excrement. Die Glocke exists against a background of real history that is fairly astounding and historically indisputed. German scientists and engineers created a plethora of highly advanced machines that to a World War II audience would have seemed to be almost from the pages of science fiction. They built jet fighters like the Messerschmitt Me-262. The rocket interceptor, the Bachem Natter. The V-1 robot bomb. The V-2, the world's first practical ballistic missile, and plenty more besides. And all these weapons were built by a sinister, secretive regime that used slave labor and inhabited a world of vast underground bases worthy of a James Bond novel. In short, Nazi Germany was fertile ground for exaggerating historical truth. Die Glocke entered the public consciousness in 2000 in a book that spawned several more examining this phenomenon. All were in agreement that the man who created Die Glocke, or at least was administratively in charge, was SS Obergruppenführer Dr. Hans Kammler, the sinister head of the V for Vengeance weapons program. Fortunately for all concerned, Hans Kammler was straight out of central casting, an almost comic book Nazi villain who managed to disappear into thin air at war's end in May 1945, never to be seen again. I've made a video about this disappearing act, link in the end screen. According to many internet sources, which all seem to reference the book I mentioned from 2000 and another from 2001, the SS designed and built the strange anti-gravitation craft, whose shape gave it the name the Bell, powered by a mysterious fuel called Cerium-525, otherwise known as red mercury. Die Glocke was very dangerous and unstable, but I won't describe how it was operated, as all explanations are entirely theoretical. Suffice it to say, the bell was described as being between 12 and 14 feet tall and 9 feet wide, and made of 3-inch thick ceramic material. And just in case anyone was unaware of its origin, a large swastika was conveniently placed on the side for identification purposes. So who actually built this device? Here we run into roadblocks, or more precisely, a complete lack of documentary evidence. This is unusual, as the Germans carefully recorded everything else that they did in World War II, yet when it comes to Die Glocke, the paper trail is stone cold. In fact, it appears that the modern evidence for the existence of Die Glocke seems to rest on one author's alleged conversations with a Polish intelligence officer who had access to a secret dossier of material from the interrogation of SS involved with the project. Various names have been suggested, largely due to their proximity to real Nazi secret programs, one of the foremost being Dr. Werner Heisenberg. Heisenberg was one of the foremost German physicists to work for the Nazis and was a leader in the German atomic bomb program, which slowly and rather unsuccessfully attempted to construct a nuclear reactor, partially successful, and build an atomic weapon, unsuccessful, before the war ended. We know where Heisenberg was and what he was working on throughout the war. He was also handily captured by the Americans in 1945 and thoroughly interrogated by them, but failed to mention Die Glocke. Well, there were plenty of Nazi scientists who could have been involved with the bell. Yes, and the US captured and shipped nearly all of Nazi Germany's best scientific minds to the States in a top-secret operation codenamed Paperclip just after the war. Could the US have also captured Die Glocke and shipped that to the States as well? In fact, Die Glocke was not first mentioned in 2000, but rather in 1960 in France in a book titled The Morning of the Magicians. Translated into English in 1963, it covered a series of Nazi topics that all had some dash of real history at their core. For example, Nazi UFOs, Nazi occultism, and Die Glocke. Regarding UFOs or flying saucer craft, the Horten brothers had built flying wings for the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, and the brothers and their designs ended up in the US in 1946. You can see how the Horten design would influence later US aircraft like the B-2 stealth bomber. Some have suggested that Nazi flying wings and US-derived test vehicles contributed to the UFO craze of the 1950s. And regarding Nazi occultism, again, there is a dash of truth behind the story. Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS, was a notorious crank and used a German castle, Wewelsburg, as a sort of holy SS temple where some strange pseudo-religious ceremonies and researches were conducted. This is fact, but it is open to sensational reinterpretations by certain authors and TV companies. The subjects in the book The Morning of the Magicians fed into the 1960s counterculture and the later 1970s and 80s New Age movement. Die Glocke was presented as fact, but a fact bereft of any supporting evidence. Such ideas as Die Glocke were also very popular in the pulp fiction of the 1960s and 70s, where the Nazis were portrayed as having developed some truly astounding secret technologies, including space travel and even time travel. The reason this sort of nonsense arose was precisely because the Americans were astounded by the high-tech weapons that they uncovered, the jet and rocket planes, the ballistic missiles, the secret underground bases, the flying wings, the electro U-boats, and so much more. In the post-war period of atomic bombs and Cold War tensions, imaginations were given free rein, particularly as the UFO craze emerged into the popular consciousness in the 1950s, and Americans were being exposed to a huge amount of sci-fi movies and TV shows that often referenced evil Nazi scientists and their otherworldly inventions. Die Glocke was supposed to be an anti-gravity machine. So did the Germans experiment with anti-gravity, as they seem to have experimented with everything else, from jets to rockets to the occult. Perhaps is the answer, but again, not much evidence exists. However, according to some periodicals, NASA has been experimenting with anti-gravity, or should I say the manipulation of gravity, since the early 1990s. The Russians have likewise been doing the same, and even published a scientific paper that described an anti-gravity device they built in 1992. For all NASA's exceptionally deep pockets and modern computing power, it has struggled to design and build an anti-gravity device of any sort. Private companies like Boeing and BAE Systems have also dabbled in anti-gravity research. It appears that when America was gathering up hundreds of Nazi scientists in 1945 to 46 under Operation Paperclip, they managed to capture the rocket scientists and the chemical and bioweapons boffins and the aeronautical engineers, but not the anti-gravity experts. To this day, we don't know their names, where they worked, or have ever recorded even one credible document that show what they were up to under Kammler's urging. We have to pose one obvious question at this point. If Die Glocke was built, and perhaps flown in 1945, and the men who built it were captured by the US or the Soviet Union, why were the Russians and Americans trying to build an anti-gravity device from scratch in the 1990s and 2000s? Surely the Nazi research would have already shown them how to do so decades before. And this leads to the most overwhelmingly obvious question of all. If Hitler had UFOs and anti-gravity flying machines, how the hell did he lose the war? So, apart from Hans Kammler and Werner Heisenberg, have any other names emerged from the literature on Die Glocke that might shed some light on whether it really existed? Many sources have mixed the German atomic bomb project with Die Glocke. Some sources state that the Bell project was run by SS Obergruppenführer Emil Marsow. But Maulwurf was a governor of the province of Pomerania from 1940 to 45 and a higher SS and police leader and general of police, heavily involved in the Holocaust. Before the war, he had been a factory worker and was a career SS and Nazi Party member. What use would Maulwurf have been to the Bell program? Another name put forward by researchers, allegedly from secret files I mentioned concerning the interrogation of SS leaders by Poland after the war, was SS Gruppenführer Jakob Sporrenberg. Again, Sporrenberg was a career SS police official involved intimately in the Holocaust in Poland and the Soviet Union. He had no scientific or engineering background, and no evidence exists for his involvement with Die Glocke. One piece of evidence, often put forward by researchers who believe in the existence of Die Glocke, is the Kecksburg UFO incident of 1965. On the night of the 9th of December 1965, a large fireball was viewed by thousands of people across 6 US states and Ontario in Canada. Trailing some kind of material, the object crashed in the woods at Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, 30 miles northeast of Pittsburgh. The US Army quickly cordoned off the area, adding to the mystery. Before long, a UFO was reported to have crashed, and then Die Glocke was named. The story being the object was a captured example of the bell that crashed during tests. Regardless of what landed at Kecksburg, it soon became almost as famous as the Roswell incident in popular culture and ufology circles. NASA revealed in 2005 that the object had actually been a Soviet satellite, Cosmos 96, that re-entered the atmosphere and broke up, hence the Army cordoning around the site at the height of the Cold War and great secrecy surrounding the event. Whatever the truth, the story has grown up that a craft similar in shape to Die Glocke was recovered from Kecksburg by the military. Whatever it was at Kecksburg, it, like Die Glocke, has provided plenty of material for certain kinds of TV documentaries, much in vogue from the 1990s to the present. German scientists were certainly busy working on many projects that were either abandoned during the war or curtailed by Germany's surrender in May 1945. If Die Glocke existed, from some interviews conducted with scientists involved in the atomic weapons program, the bell was probably part of that program as some kind of nuclear physics device, rather than a flying time machine. And if it existed at all, remains the million-dollar question. As they say, the truth is out there. Thanks for watching.